Here we are, and welcome to today's podcast. I am joined today by my son, Dan Quitman Carr III, and we call him Quitman for short. And he is my firstborn son. And Jackie and I, we've been married for 17 years. And Quitman was born right at 15 years ago. He'll be 16 coming November. And he and I, we have many political conversations. Just the other day, we were sitting at a restaurant in Slidell, Louisiana, and Quitman and I were going back and forth. And I'm talking about politics, government, different governments, and presidents, Republican primaries, and the people sitting behind us was listening to our entire conversation, and they ended up coming up afterwards and saying how much they appreciated, our conversation and listening. And of course, Quitman,
how we could disagree without chewing each other's faces off.
Yeah, because we had some disagreements. We were talking about a few things. We had a few disagreements. I don't remember what they were now. Do you remember one of them?
Mm-hmm.
What was one of them?
I don't want to say it on YouTube.
Well, we had one. We had several. And so one thing I've been talking about over the last couple of weeks, if you've been following my channel or even following on my website, if you haven't been to my website, go to danqcar.com and you can read, more about things that I talk about, here on the channel. And hopefully if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and do so. And if you don't follow on YouTube or on Facebook as well, and you can follow us on Facebook on Dan Carr, and that's where you can find us. And then, of course, right here on the channel on YouTube, and then on the website, danqcar.com. But one thing that I've been talking about is we need to get the next generation involved. In one of the articles that I wrote the other day, I was talking about having a generational gap, whenever we neglect to train or teach the next generation. Quitman and I, we discuss politics all the time, and we have different opinions. I remember back in 2016, and whenever Trump was running for president, Quitman was pro-Trump 100%, and I was Ted Cruz, and he was more with Trump, and then we ended up eventually all getting on the same page. And but anyway, I just wanted to bring him in today and just talk with him and just ask him a few questions. And, just talking about, presidents, and then, of course, what can we do, to get, this generation, which is called Gen Zs?
Mm-hmm.
Gen Zs, engaged in this system so we don't have a generational gap. What am I called?
You're a Gen X.
Gen X, okay.
He acts like a boomer, but he's Gen X.
Okay. So, anyway, I don't understand all those different Gen Z, millennials, boomers. You said I'm a what?
Gen X.
A Gen X. And so anyway, it's all very interesting to me. So Quitman, tell us what you think. Tell us, first off, name your top 5 presidents.
Well, it's hard to rank them like which one. I can name the top 5 that I most enjoy the most, but it's hard to put them in a specific order. But I would say definitely George Washington obviously would be first for me. But up there would probably have to be people like Reagan.
So Washington number 1,
yeah.
Reagan number 2.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily put him in 2, but he's in the top 5, And then Madison, Monroe, they would be up there in that top 5, both founding fathers. Madison, the father of the Constitution, emphasizing small government, things like that. Monroe, about the same thing. He was Madison and Jefferson both served in Washington's administration, and I would definitely have Jefferson up there as well. So
why would you have? Tell me why Washington number 1.
Well, just the president he set, as the first president, he definitely set how the office was going to be ran the next 250 years, So he had a cabinet, right? He did. That's not in the Constitution. So he had that all on his own. He recognized that the government shouldn't be headed by one person. So he had Jefferson as his secretary, he had Jefferson in his secretary. He had Alexander Hamilton in his cabinet. He had Edmund Randolph in his cabinet, a few men like that. So he recognized that he couldn't just do it on his own. So why
Reagan? So. Give me some of your top reasons why Reagan.
Well, Reagan promoted small government and conservatism in a time where the country was like the 70s. We know with Jimmy Carter how we had rapid inflation, just as we have now, and with the Iran hostage
So are you
crisis,
saying Joe Biden wouldn't be in your top 10?
No, he wouldn't.
Would he be in your top 20?
Probably not. No.
Where would you? So then you had Madison. So Madison will be in your top 5.
Yeah.
So tell me something good about Madison.
Yeah. Well, he was, the father of the Constitution. So he definitely was promoting, small government, and he definitely. I feel like there wouldn't be a constitution without him. We wouldn't have the Bill of Rights. He also authored most of the Bill of Rights with freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, religious freedom, the Second Amendment, stuff like that.
So I'm just going to throw a name at you, and you just tell me something
goodness.
good or bad. I have not gotten with him before, and I did not tell him any names that I was going to mention. So I'm just going to mention a name, and you tell me good, bad. Tell me something good about them or bad about them. If you know something good, or bad about them. So let's see here. Let's look at Woodrow Wilson.
Oh goodness, he was not a good president whatsoever. He's probably one of the lowest ranked presidents. I think I definitely would rank him really low. I think most people that would know anything about Woodrow Wilson would rank him low. Well, the presidents before him were Roosevelt and Taft, right? They were already really progressive. They were Republicans, but they were progressive, as that age, the early 1920s, was the 1900s was a very progressive era in United States history. And then Woodrow Wilson was the next president after Taft. And he was just like those two men, like combined, and then times two. He was very progressive. He instituted
What is something that he did that was really bad?
Well, he regulated a lot of government. He instituted a lot of government regulations and stuff. And the only reason he was ever president in the first place was because the Republican Party was split. So they both were going for two different people. So
all right, let's talk about Jimmy Carter.
Oh goodness, Jimmy Carter was also he's ranked by me. He's ranked low, but by most people he's ranked mid to low as well. So he was not necessarily one of the best presidents, with rising inflation, with the Iran hostage crisis. He was basically like the 1970s version of Joe Biden, which the 1970s already had a Joe Biden because he was already in the Senate back then. But
so what about Franklin Roosevelt?
He instituted a lot of progressive ideas too with the New Deal. He did good in World War II. I'll give him that. But he kept the country together. He's the only president to serve more than 2 terms. So obviously the country liked him. He just had the New Deal with very progressive ideas and very much expanded government, a lot.
All right. What about George Bush, the dad?
Senior? The dad, senior. I know a lot of people talk about how he said, "I will not raise taxes," and then taxes were risen during his administration. And I phrase it like that because he didn't necessarily raise taxes on his own. Congress has the power to raise taxes. So people give him a lot of crap for that. But I wouldn't necessarily blame him for that. But he's a meh president.
All right. So what about his son?
I didn't like how he handled 9/11. Or I didn't like how he handled Katrina. But with the situation there, it was just not good whatsoever. And then 9/11, the war on terrorism, that was good. He should have got Osama bin Laden, had him killed, and it should have been done with. We shouldn't have gone into Iraq. I think he just did that to build personal wealth with the Bush family.
So, Quitman, one thing that I always talk about is trying to get the next generation involved. How can we get your generation engaged? What are some things, that we can do to get your generation engaged in, whether it's and helping with different candidates running for office. And you'll be voting in just a couple of years, 3 years from now. And here in Mississippi, back in 2019, whenever we had Jim Hood running against our now governor, Tate Reeves, between 18 and 30-year-olds, if you'd have just taken that vote, they would have voted for Jim Hood. And the Republican Party, we would have lost the mansion. It would have went to the Democrat Party. What are some things that we as Republicans can do to reach your generation and get your group to vote, to vote Republican? Maybe tell me 1 or 2 things that we can do.
Well, I think talking about issues that we actually care about, as Gen Z and millennials actually care about, because we're basically the same. But things that we actually care about, like climate change, is very popular among my generation and millennials. Shootings, with school shootings and college shootings that happen all the time, that handling situations like that, actually talking about them, acknowledging them, that yes, this is a problem and it's happening. My generation, I hate to say it, but we don't care that gas prices are $3 a gallon. We just don't care. So that's obviously shown, because my generation votes significantly Democrat, and Democrats have policies that enable rising
Well, your
gas prices,
generation will
so-
go spend $6-7 on a cup of coffee.
Yeah. So
know?
we don't care about.
And so does my generation. I mean, I drink, expensive coffee occasionally, and I do care about the gas prices.
Yeah.
Very much so. So let's talk about schools for a moment. What do you think? Looking at it from your perspective, from the Gen Z, what can we do with the situation with school shootings? What's something that you think we can do?
Well, I have been in lockdown at school before, so like all you do is in school lockdowns, we just basically board up the door, and then the teachers just tell you to be quiet. So there's nothing that the students themselves really can do other than, but like we don't cause the school shootings, obviously. So I feel like actually putting criminals in jail and keeping them in jail for a long time, have better acknowledging the mental health crisis in America, because I feel like most of these school shooters, I know that all the school shooters have some sort of mental issue, right? A regular, or not a regular person, a person that is well in the mind doesn't shoot up a school.
Well, I think, one thing I think about when you look at school shootings and you take, a lot of people do it for lots of different reasons, but I believe in capital punishment.
Yeah.
And instead of putting somebody in prison for 50 years, in my opinion would be, take them out and let's have a quick punishment for the whole world to see. And I think a lot of this stuff would stop. Putting people in jail for murder that are convicted criminals, for 60 years, I don't believe is the answer. Swift punishment, I think would stop some of that. But I think you're right. I think that, there is a lot of mental health that's happening and with some of these young people, and so I do think I think that's a vital point, when it comes to mental health. What is something else that, something else that we can do how can we get your group involved in the Republican Party?
Well, we talked about school shootings. I mentioned climate change in passing. I don't have solutions for climate change because obviously I believe that the government should not be the ones to work to solve that. It's not a government issue, personally. Yeah, obviously we talked about school shootings. And I mentioned climate change in passing. So climate change, obviously I do believe that it is an issue and that it needs to be acknowledged and taken care of, but I don't believe that the government should be the ones doing it. So I don't necessarily have all the answers, but I think if we actually acknowledged that it existed and we actually had plans and steps to solve it, I feel like we could get a lot of...
I agree with you about,
Gen Z.
government. I don't believe the government should be...
Mm-hmm.
The government is not the answer.
Yeah.
Anytime the government gets involved, things just end up getting screwed up a lot more than what they already are. So I do believe that.
Just look at healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. I do not believe that going all electric is the answer. I don't think that's the answer. I mean, because whenever you look at some of these where they're having to mine this stuff for batteries, it's doing a lot more damage than what gas or coal is doing. And so, whenever they try to say, well, this is cleaner energy, well, it's all tainting the environment. And there's a lot of countries that, America does really good at trying to keep the environment clean. It's China and some of these other countries, that need to do a better job at trying to keep the environment clean. When you look at the amount of garbage that is put into the oceans, it is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
That was you one time telling me about.
Yeah.
You could see from a satellite. It was like a garbage in the ocean.
Oh yeah, the Pacific Garbage Patch. Yeah.
It's like as big as Texas.
Yeah. So
That's unbelievable.
Texas is.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And that's not coming from here. That's coming from a lot of these countries that are just taking their garbage and dumping it in the ocean.
Yeah, China emits more CO2 than the entire Western Hemisphere and Western Europe. And I think 49 out of the 50 most polluted rivers in the world are in either China, India, Southeast Asia, or Africa.
Yeah.
So
And I agree with that. And so it goes back to, once again, government's not the answer. The answer is people coming together and trying to come up with solutions. Some of the solutions needs to be like China quit emptying and dumping trash in their ocean, which is unbelievable. So tell me, what do you think about 2024? Who do you think is going to be the Republican nominee?
I think it's going to be Trump. I think Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. And I feel like if you just look at the polls for 5 minutes, then you'll see that Trump is going to be the nominee, whether you like Trump or not. So he's, yeah.
Who do you think he picks for his vice president?
I don't really have an opinion on who I would like to see, but realistically, it'll probably be either Ramaswamy or Nikki Haley, I think, personally. That's just what I think.
And do you think that Trump and Vivek or Trump and Nikki Haley can beat Joe Biden? Or do you think he's even going to be the Democrat nominee?
I think unless he drops out or is unalived, I think Joe Biden will be the Democratic nominee. So, yeah, I think he will be. But I do think, personally, at this moment, I don't see a path where Trump could win, personally. I'd rather Trump than Joe Biden. Obviously, life was so much better when Trump was president than Joe Biden. But definitely, I do think that Joe Biden would win. But
Quitman, thank you for coming on the podcast with me today. Thanks for jumping on my channel. I'm going to have Quitman back more and more, just talking just more and more and about how we can get more Gen Zs engaged, get Gen Zs involved. I like one of the things that he talked about, you know, to where just having the conversations about school shootings and acknowledging them and the mental health issues, you know, that's happening and going on. And then, you know, the issues whenever it comes to climate change. And I like, you know, he's got good thoughts on, you know, that the government's not the answer and the government's never the answer. As he mentioned, we've been with healthcare, you know, government's not the answer. Yeah. And so, but I do believe that we need to get more of our teenagers, more of this Gen Z crowd involved and engaged in the conversation, because this is the future of America. A couple of years he'll be going to college, and then of course he'll be voting, and hopefully one day possibly even, you know, maybe running for office or serving his community in some way. So Quitman, thanks for jumping on the podcast today. Really appreciate you coming in. And of course, I always love to hear your thoughts on the presidents. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so. You can follow us on Facebook, Dan Carr. You can follow us on our website, danqcarr.com. And as always, until next time, God bless you, and God bless the great United States of America.